Imagine the person who once controlled your every thought, every emotion, suddenly realizing you don't care anymore. You see that flash of panic in their eyes, the realization that their power is gone. It's like watching a puppet without strings. And here's the secret most people never notice. This is the moment where the narcissist's true self begins to unravel. The very strategies they've used to dominate you, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, manipulation, suddenly stop working. And you finally get freedom. If you're seeing this and realizing how powerful indifference can be, pause for a second and think about your own boundaries. Share this with someone who needs to understand the psychology of detachment. It might be the first step to reclaiming your freedom. Narcissists are built on attention. Their entire self-concept depends on being admired, feared, or emotionally manipulated. When you stop giving them the reactions they crave, it's as if their world suddenly collapses. They experience a kind of psychological whiplash, an acute form of cognitive dissonance. Why? Because the rules they've relied on for years, guilt, shame, and emotional provocation, no longer apply. Indifference is a mirror reflecting their inability to control the narrative, and it terrifies them more than confrontation. Many narcissists will double-check your behavior, searching for hidden emotions, scanning for signs of engagement, hoping you'll give them back the attention they desperately need. This isn't just stubbornness, it's an existential panic. The person who once thrived on your energy realizes that your neutrality has robbed them of a predictable outcome. You no longer feed the cycle, and that's a devastating blow to their ego. In essence, your indifference doesn't just affect them emotionally, it destabilizes their psychological equilibrium. They are forced to confront the fact that their usual methods are ineffective, and this is powerful because it's a moment of clarity for you as well. You finally understand that their power over you was conditional, entirely dependent on your engagement. When that engagement disappears, so does their influence. Your indifference is not just a defense mechanism, it's a form of empowerment that triggers profound consequences for the narcissist, consequences they rarely anticipate but always feel. When a narcissist realizes you no longer care, the first thing they feel is the sudden erosion of their power. Their influence over you has always been rooted in your attention, your reactions, and your willingness to engage with their drama. When that engagement disappears, the very foundation of their control crumbles. This is not just a minor inconvenience for them, it strikes at the core of their identity. Narcissists define themselves through dominance and validation. They thrive when others are emotionally tethered to them, when they can provoke anger, guilt, or fear to manipulate outcomes. Your indifference strips away that leverage. Suddenly, the clever strategies they've spent years perfecting, subtle gaslighting, charm, or intimidation, become ineffective, almost meaningless. They may initially respond with confusion, trying to figure out what changed, replaying past interactions in their mind, searching for a crack in your armor. But the truth is, there is no crack. Your emotional disengagement signals a shift in the dynamic that they cannot control. As their power fades, they experience frustration, often accompanied by a growing sense of vulnerability. Some may lash out in anger, others may withdraw in shame, and some will desperately attempt to reclaim lost influence. But no matter the tactic, your decision to no longer feed their ego creates a permanent imbalance. The narcissist is left without their usual foothold, and you gain a psychological freedom that they cannot undermine. In losing your care, they lose their power and you gain the upper hand without saying a single word. When a narcissist senses that you no longer care, one of the first reactions you'll often notice is a surge of aggression. This is not random, it is a direct response to the sudden collapse of their control. Narcissists rely on the predictable emotional reactions of others to maintain their self-esteem and sense of dominance. When those reactions vanish, it creates a psychological void that they instinctively try to fill. Aggression, whether overt anger, passive-aggressive maneuvers, or subtle manipulations, becomes their primary tool. They may lash out verbally, exaggerate past grievances, or attempt to provoke guilt and insecurity, all in an effort to regain the influence they just lost. This behavior is fueled by the frustration of realizing that the emotional leverage they once had is now gone. The intensity of their aggression often correlates with how invested they were in controlling your responses. Interestingly, this is also a form of testing boundaries. They are probing to see if your indifference is genuine or temporary. However, your calm and consistent detachment undermines these attempts, highlighting the futility of their tactics. The aggression may feel destabilizing, even threatening, but it is a sign that their ego is exposed and vulnerable. In essence, their heightened aggression is not about you. It is about their inability to tolerate a loss of power. Recognizing this allows you to maintain your composure, resist reaction, and continue holding the space of indifference, which ultimately reinforces your strength while exposing the narcissist's fragility. Not every narcissist reacts to your indifference with anger or aggression. Some respond with a quieter, more insidious strategy, silent withdrawal. When they realize that their usual manipulations no longer produce results, they may retreat completely, disappearing from your life or interactions without warning. This withdrawal is not a neutral act. It is a defensive maneuver born from humiliation and loss of control. Narcissists rely on constant attention to validate their self-worth, and when that attention is withheld, it feels like an invisible blow to their identity. By withdrawing, they attempt to regain a sense of superiority from a safe distance, avoiding the vulnerability of being openly powerless. What makes this tactic so disorienting is that it often comes without explanation. One moment they were engaged in their usual drama, and the next they are gone, leaving you with a sense of ambiguity and unresolved tension. This unpredictability is calculated to test whether your indifference is genuine, to see if you'll react or chase them. In reality, their retreat is a reflection of their fragile ego, not a sign of self-reflection or remorse. It exposes their inability to tolerate loss of influence. Understanding this pattern allows you to see through the silence. Their withdrawal is not your problem, and it doesn't require a response. By maintaining your calm and staying disengaged, you preserve your emotional freedom while they wrestle privately with the discomfort of powerlessness. In essence, silent withdrawal is their way of coping with failure without admitting it. When a narcissist realizes you no longer care, one of the most common psychological responses is projection escalation. Narcissists are rarely capable of taking responsibility for their own behavior, so instead they project their faults, insecurities, and aggression onto you. What this means in practice is that they may accuse you of things you didn't do, exaggerate your supposed shortcomings, or reinterpret neutral events as betrayals or attacks. The intensity of these projections increases precisely because your indifference removes the usual emotional fuel they rely on. They sense the loss of control and attempt to manufacture chaos as a way to provoke a reaction, to pull you back into engagement. Projection escalation is also a defensive mechanism. By placing blame elsewhere, they can maintain the illusion that they are the ones in the right and that their world is still orderly. You might notice accusations, rumors, or distortions that feel completely disproportionate to reality, but these are not grounded in truth. They are a reflection of their internal panic. Interestingly, the more indifferent you remain, the more desperate these projections can become. This is because your calm exposes the futility of their strategies, and the narcissist may ramp up their attempts to regain psychological leverage. Recognizing projection escalation is crucial because it allows you to separate fact from manipulative fiction. Your awareness becomes a shield. Their blame is no longer contagious, and their attempts to provoke you only highlight their fragility. In essence, projection escalation is a window into the narcissist's inner turmoil, not a reflection of your actions or worth. When a narcissist realizes you no longer care, one of the most striking reactions you might witness is what psychologists call desperate idealization. After experiencing the loss of attention and control, some narcissists attempt a sudden and intense effort to win you back. This is not genuine change or introspection. It is a tactical display designed to reassert dominance and regain the emotional foothold they have lost. You might notice over-the-top compliments, sudden acts of generosity, excessive apologies, or exaggerated declarations of love and admiration. The key here is intensity and urgency. The behavior often feels extreme, almost performative, because the narcissist is reacting to the anxiety of being powerless in your eyes. This desperate idealization is essentially a form of emotional bait. It is a last-ditch attempt to manipulate your perception and provoke the reaction they can no longer reliably elicit through anger, guilt, or drama. It also reflects the fragility of their ego. They are acutely aware that your indifference exposes the limits of their influence, and they will try anything to reclaim it. However, this stage is usually short-lived. Once they realize that your detachment is consistent and unwavering, their idealization fades, often replaced by disappointment, withdrawal, or renewed attempts at projection. Recognizing desperate idealization allows you to see it for what it truly is, a strategic, ego-driven maneuver rather than an authentic expression of emotion. Maintaining your composure and boundaries in the face of this behavior not only preserves your psychological freedom, but also communicates clearly that their manipulations no longer hold sway. When a narcissist realizes you no longer care, one thing becomes painfully clear. They almost never engage in genuine self-reflection. Their sense of self is tightly wound around maintaining superiority, control, and admiration, and admitting fault threatens that fragile structure. Instead of looking inward, they double down on denial, rationalization, and externalizing blame. This avoidance of introspection is a psychological defense mechanism. By refusing to examine their own role in the dynamic, they can preserve the illusion of being right, justified, or somehow victimized. You may notice them replaying events in ways that shift responsibility to you, rewriting the narrative so that your indifference appears unfair or unwarranted. They may also immerse themselves in distractions, seek admiration elsewhere, or exaggerate the faults of others to avoid confronting their own shortcomings. This is why, even when faced with clear evidence of the harm they caused, they rarely pause to ask, "What could I have done differently?" Their ego cannot tolerate it. Your indifference shines a light on this deficiency because it removes the usual feedback loop that feeds their self-image. Without your emotional engagement, they are forced to face a reality they cannot process. Their influence is limited, their control is not absolute, and their sense of superiority is precarious. This lack of self-reflection keeps them trapped in repetitive cycles of manipulation and projection. Recognizing this allows you to detach fully, understanding that their reactions are never about growth, but about preserving an illusion. Your freedom comes not from changing them, but from seeing them clearly as they are, unable and unwilling to truly reflect. When a narcissist realizes you no longer care, something profound happens. The relationship dynamic undergoes a permanent shift. Narcissists are accustomed to operating within a system where they hold the emotional leverage, where your reactions validate their power and inflate their ego. Once that leverage is removed, the familiar balance of control collapses and nothing can fully restore it. Your indifference signals a boundary they cannot cross, a psychological limit they cannot manipulate, and for many narcissists, this is disorienting and humiliating. Some may attempt temporary repairs, desperate attempts to regain influence, but the truth is that the shift is lasting. You have fundamentally altered the rules of engagement. The narcissist now exists in a space where their usual tactics, provocation, manipulation, charm, no longer guarantee predictable outcomes. This permanence forces them to confront a reality they rarely handle well. They cannot control everything, and their ability to dominate you is gone. Importantly, this is empowering for you. It creates a space of psychological freedom where your reactions are your own, no longer dictated by fear, guilt, or obligation. Even if they attempt to return, the power dynamic has already changed. The subtle but undeniable truth is that you have broken the cycle of influence that sustained them. Your emotional disengagement leaves a lasting impression, one that reshapes not just your relationship but also the way they approach others in the future. In essence, by no longer caring, you redefine the boundaries, establish autonomy, and create a permanent shift that the narcissist can neither ignore nor reverse. When a narcissist realizes you no longer care, everything changes, not just for them, but for you. The fear, the manipulation, the constant need for validation, all collapse in the face of your indifference. You are no longer playing by their rules, and in that shift, you reclaim your power. They may react with anger, withdrawal, projection, or even desperate attempts to win you back, but none of it can undo what has already happened. Your detachment is not cruelty, it is clarity. It signals that their control was never permanent, that their influence depended entirely on your willingness to engage. In choosing not to react, you break the cycle of chaos they thrive on, and you force them to confront a reality they are ill-equipped to handle. Over time, the patterns of aggression, projection, and charm lose their potency because you have set boundaries that cannot be crossed. This is freedom, the freedom to exist without fear of manipulation, without the constant weight of their ego pressing down on you. It is a lesson not just for them, but for yourself. Power is not taken, it is preserved when you refuse to give it away. The narcissist may never truly change, and that is not your responsibility. What matters is that you have changed the dynamic permanently, leaving them to wrestle with their frustration while you move forward unshaken. In the end, your indifference is the ultimate assertion of self, a quiet but undeniable victory that speaks louder than any words could.